Hi, everyone. Welcome back to A Pastor's Thoughts. This is Chris Harris, and today we're going to look at another video of Leighton. This is one where he's responding to something that James White said. And I'm not going to defend James White per se. I do agree with most of what James White says. I have to give him a lot of credit for where I am in my faith today. But mainly my points of contention are going to be with Leighton. And yeah, I don't I don't remember this entire video. It's been a little while. So this is almost going to be like a reaction. I'm going to play it, and I've had some complaints that playing it at even 1.25 speed's a little too much. So I'm just going to play this at normal speed, and we'll see how far we go. The video itself is only like 18 minutes long. Maybe we'll get through the whole thing, maybe we won't. It just depends on how long I really feel like going here. So we're going to get to it. Let me pull up this video. Okay, so now I have Leighton's video pulled up here, and it is titled "How to Respond to Blatant Misrepresentation." Okay, so I'm not so worried about, again, defending James White in this video. I may say a few things here and there. Mainly, I'm interacting with what Leighton says. So I'm going to let him speak for himself, and I'll stop him when I want to say something as we go through this, and hopefully this will go well. Let's get him started and see what we got here.
That God is a disposer and ruler of all things, and that from the remotest eternity, according to his own wisdom, he decreed what he was to do, and now by his power executes what he decreed. Hence we maintain that by his providence, not heaven and earth and eminent creatures only, but also the counsels and wills of men, notice that, the wills of men are so governed as to move exactly in the course which he has destined. In other words, when you will to sin, it is in the course which God has destined for you to sin and to will. So when you have pride, which the Bible says is not from the Father, but from the world, John Calvin says it's as God has destined it to be. It is within his decreed will. It is under his sovereign control. He has brought it to pass unchangeably. The devil and the whole train of the ungodly, Calvin goes on to write, are in all directions held in by the hand of God as with a bridle, so that they can neither conceive any mischief, nor plan what they have conceived, nor how much soever they may have planned, move a single finger to perpetrate, unless insofar as he permits, nay, unless insofar as he commands, that they are not only bound by his fetters, but are even forced to do him service, end quote. It is very wicked, he goes on to write in another discourse, merely to investigate the causes of God's will, for his will is, and rightly ought to be, the cause of all things that are. So what is the cause of all things that are, according to John Calvin? God's will.
Yeah, let's stop here and talk about this quote from John Calvin a little bit. Yeah, Leighton, I'll have to ask you again, like, do you know what Calvin is actually speaking about there? Because it seems to be that you think that he is this necessitarian type when it comes to how he views things. That everything comes about necessarily, like when God decrees a thing, that it's comes about in a necessary fashion. And the problem with that is that that doesn't fit with Calvin historically. And what I mean by that is a lot of people saw Martin Luther as a necessitarian, and he says a lot of things in his writings. Luther does, to where he really speaks bad against freedom of the will. But Luther was kind of harsh in his writings and harsh in what he said. Like, if you've ever read him, you get what I'm talking about there. And so everyone comes down on him for this necessitarian type view. They speak of him in terms of fatalism and so forth and so on, because he seems to just destroy contingency of freedom. Right? Contingency are just are things that can or cannot be, and freedom, of course, is freedom. So a lot of things that Luther said would make it seem that he just completely denied those things, right? That he was just a straight out necessitarian, which is the picture that Leighton is painting here of John Calvin. Now, why bring up Martin Luther? Well, here's the reason for bringing up Luther is that Luther himself wasn't a necessitarian, right? He just had some harsh ways of speaking. He wasn't the most eloquent speaker or writer. He didn't care too much for distinctions that come out of the scholastics. I think that was something that was fairly clear in his writings. He didn't care very much for the scholastics. But Luther, according to most or the total of his body of writings, was not a necessitarian. He did believe in freedom and contingency. Now, again, why bring up Luther when we're talking about Calvin? Well, this is the reason why. Because what happens is that after Luther has said these things and people believe these necessitarian ideas of Luther, it is Calvin and Philip Melanchthon that come along and they smooth out what Luther said. They're like, well, and I'm paraphrasing here wildly, right? But you just have to go with me on this. The history's there; it's 100% right. Most of this comes from Richard Muller's work on Reformed freedom. Calvin and Melanchthon come along and they smooth out what Luther said, and they basically say, we know he sounds bad, and he really seems to contradict himself in a few different places in his writings, but he allowed for freedom and contingency, right? And the reason that Calvin and Melanchthon were smoothing the words of Luther out is because they themselves understood those distinctions better than others. So Calvin was definitely not a necessitarian. He was defending against Luther being a necessitarian, if you will, thinking that all things just fall out necessarily. Now, what Leighton was reading there was in line with what Calvin believes. It's in line with what I believe. It's the truth. That is that there is nothing that moves outside of God's control. Now, what does that mean exactly? I brought this up in another video prior to this. And that has a lot to do with what the confessions say. And what I mean by that is that while it is true that all things are all things that occur according to the decree of God, that doesn't take away freedom and contingency. Right? Calvin believed in freedom and contingency. While it's the case that no one can do anything other than God decreed, that doesn't mean that as they do these things that they do them freely and contingently, in that they absolutely have the ability to be able to do contrary to what God has decreed. Right? It's just that they never will. This is how we account for contingency. I mean, it's just a distinction that's there. You can't think of God's causation, and when Calvin brings out the causation part, you can't think of God's causation when it comes to like critiquing reformed people, reformed views. You cannot think of God's causation as being univocal with human causation, and that's kind of what Leighton's doing here. He's saying, well, look, Calvin said God is the cause of all things. Well, sure, I think you should agree with that too, that he is the first cause, right? That nothing comes about without him first bringing it into being. Now, you may believe that, well, I mean, I'm not going to speak for you. I'm not going to say that. What Calvin believes is that, yes, that everything falls out according to God's decree, and it can't be any different than that, right? But it doesn't fall out necessarily. Right, it falls out freely and contingently, just like the confessions say. They work off of the same understanding of where Calvin was coming from himself. So yeah, of course later, but we can speak in that way. We can put Calvin in that same group. I think I'm fine with that. It should be fine. Again, I pointed out that Calvin defended freedom and contingency when it came to Luther. So if he defended freedom and contingency when it comes to Luther, how can it then be the case that he is this necessitarian that Leighton is painting him out to be, right? He brings up the term force there. It's not, Calvin's not saying that the God like reaches down and grabs hold of people and forces them to do something or makes them do something. It's just saying that everything will fall out according to God's decree, right? Even if it falls out freely and contingently, right? You just cannot critique the Reformed tradition without keeping these things in mind. Right? It's just simply the historical case that Calvin was not a necessitarian. I would say he's a compatibilist. Some wouldn't agree with me on that. there are even some Reformed folk that would say different than that. There are some Reformed people that try to put Calvin in the necessitarian type camp, but again, Richard Muller doesn't, and he's a fairly well respected Reformed historian. So I just wanted to say that, right? You read those quotes from Calvin, right, in the light of his greater body of work. You can't just forget about or kick out the greater body of the work of a theologian and take a single quote or a single passage and read it out of context, if you will, which seems to be what Leighton's doing there. So yeah, Leighton, be careful there. There's nothing wrong with what Calvin said, and it doesn't lead to fatalism or necessitarianism in the least, right? It's simply the consequences of what he believes. That the decree of God, which is the plan that doesn't have it doesn't exert force upon the world, it is the plan by which providence falls out, and providence falls out freely and contingently. Again, I hate to keep bringing that up. It's just the way it is. Let's continue, because if I stop and talk like this is going to be one long video, and I'm not trying to do that. Yeah, but it ends up being that way. I guess it just does, right? Let's continue and see what else we got.
I was downloading one of the videos that I'm queuing up for the program, and I had to stumble across a live indicator for the chief provisionist, Leighton Flowers, and I clicked on it for a second. I was in for a minute, and it was just the same old, we have to be autonomous, God must be our servant, or it just doesn't work type of situation. He was saying you can't talk about what Jonathan Edwards said about strongest desires, because that comes from God's decree. He just hates God's decree. Well, I don't know how any of those folks deal with any of this stuff. I can't answer for them. I'm speaking from a meaningfully biblically theistic perspective when I address the things that I'm addressing. But we are in a language.
Okay, so let's address a few of those things. One, I've been promoted to the chief, I guess. I wasn't aware.
Everyone thinks you're the chief of the provisionists, Leighton. Take that as like a compliment there. I mean, no big deal. All right, let's go.
The other thing is, notice how he categorizes or how he paints us by saying that we believe that God must be our servant. No, never said that. Never would say that. We're not making God into our servant. Okay, if God chooses to become a servant, that's his prerogative. That's his choice. If he chooses to demonstrate his glory by coming in a manger and washing the feet of his disciples.
Hang on a minute, Leighton. You can't jump to the incarnation from what Dr. Wise said there, right? What Dr. Wise is talking about is human autonomy, right? Separateness. So you're a self-governance, if you will, is what autonomy is. And yeah, if you posit autonomy, then you are in some ways. I think Dr. White may be exaggerating a little bit. I mean, I'm not sure that it necessitates so much making God a servant. Maybe it does a little bit, but that's in the realm that he's talking about. He's not talking about the incarnation. You're talking about something totally different there, Leighton. You're not talking about God qua God. You're talking about God in the mission of the Son upon taking on human flesh. So yeah, he came as a servant then, no doubt, right? Came as a servant then. I don't know how you can relate that to God qua God. Yeah, let's go.
And that's what he has shown us is what is true glory. Then that's on God, not on provisionist.
Well, yeah, true glory. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think that's the case. I think the true glory we'll see at the second coming, right? When he comes as a lion and devours the wicked. I think the servant part is something that was not something. It's hard to say this, right, when it comes to the doctrine of God, but it's not inherently God's nature to be. Well, it's not God's nature to be subservient to anything. What does he serve? He's completely and utterly independent from all things. So I think that's why it says in the scriptures that Jesus came to learn obedience. Like, what did God ever have to be obedient to? So I don't think that's a revelation of the true glory of God, a servant nature. That's I don't want to say it's contrary to God's nature, but it's definitely, I don't think it's a revelation of who God is ad intra, right, within his own nature. All right.
It's not as if we're making God come and to serve us. He chose to come and to serve and to give up his life as a demonstration of his love and his provision for us. That's on him. We're not making him do that.
Now, that I agree with. That was a free decision of the Son, a free decision of God to come and to be a servant, to be the suffering servant on our part. I will agree with that, but again, I don't think that the service part speaks to the nature of God. I don't know how it can. Right? God never had to be obedient to anything. Yeah. Again, I think you're mixing up categories here, Leighton, and that's not a great thing.
That we're just telling you what he told us. And so painting us as if we're trying to say that God must be the servant for us this to work and all these kinds of things, that's a canard. And for him to say, as he does here in this clip, that we hate God's decree. He just hates God's decree. He can't talk like Jonathan Edwards does. And of course we would reject what Jonathan Edwards taught. He was a theistic determinist as well, probably chief among theistic determinists, in fact. And we do reject what Jonathan Edwards says, but that doesn't mean we reject the divine decree. And this is often a conflation of the Calvinists, is to say, well, the divine decree is determinism. That's what it is. God has determined whatsoever comes to pass. That is his divine decree. And Leighton hates determinism. Therefore, Leighton hates God's decree. And that again is just a fallacy.
Yeah, maybe. I think I may be going a little too far to say that you hate the decree, but I mean, what is the decree from your point of view? I don't know. In a minute, I think you're going to say something about it's, God decrees what's good. Oh, I got you kind of. There you go. I had your face weird. I think you're going to say in a minute that God decrees what's good. But I mean, what is the decree? Is it that God decreed a few things and then he's like, oh, these filler things, right? Whatever. It doesn't make any sense. Not from a perfect being theology, at least coming from a position of the doctrine of God that I come from. And I can't remember if I mentioned it in another video. Maybe I have, maybe I haven't. I don't think I have. I did get Adam Hardwood's systematic theology. So yeah, he doesn't get extremely detailed on the doctrine of God. He goes into some details, but he doesn't deal with like all the attributes or, who it is that God is, but he does mention things like simplicity and aseity. So, I mean, if you're in that same boat with him, then you should have this understanding too, right? I don't think coming from a perfect being theology type understanding of who God is in his nature, that he is without imperfections. I think simplicity and aseity say a lot, that he is not composed of more basic, lesser, more basic parts that come together and make God. That's what simplicity is, even though simplicity is a very complex subject. I don't think it's too tough to grasp the idea of it, that God's not composed of parts. He's not made up of little things that you put together. But coming from a simplicity standpoint, and especially saying aseity, or like affirming the independence of God, whether you just, which I don't know how you do this, but some people try to say that just has to do with his existence. Like he and I don't even know what existence means if you're going to posit God as outside of time. Again, another question, but aseity and his independence, I think, goes beyond just simply that he exists because he exists. It goes in everything, that he is not dependent upon anything that is not himself. Like creation is not something that he depends upon. So I don't know how you come from that understanding of the doctrine of God and then say, well, if God has a plan, a decree, then he only decrees, or he only plans a few things, the good things. And like within those good things, there's some other stuff that happens. And he's like, I'm not going to mess with that. If it, I'll kind of deal with it as it comes along. And that's a whole nother problem, saying God just deals with something. I don't know that you'll say that. I'm just, laying out what the possibility could be here. I don't know what else we could say at this point. Right? What is God's decree? What is God's plan? Does he only plan a few things and then he leaves holes in it? Which is weird. Weird comes from someone I know who affirms exhaustive foreknowledge. You might say, well, he planned the good things and he knew these other things were going to happen, but he just kind of had to work around them. And maybe that's what you mean when you talk about the chessboard, and he's a better chess player. I don't know. It's just really weird. I don't know what you mean by the doctrine, the divine decree here. You could make that a little clearer. Maybe you do in a minute. Like I said, I don't remember the entire video. We'll see. Let me keep playing.
Leighton hates God's decree. And that again is just a fallacy. It's a canard. We love God's decree. Why? Because God decrees good things, not bad things on our system.
Right, there it is. He decrees good things and not bad things. So he doesn't decree. Now, if we're defining decree, and I hope we're defining decree in the same way, that this is God's plan, or at least that's the way the Reformed see God's decree. It is his plan for all things, right? But it is the plan. So if you say that it is God's plan as well, then you would say that God's plan doesn't include bad things, right? The bad things are just accidents that happen. They're purposeless things that are just filler portions that move within and around what has been decreed or planned by God, which are the good things only. I don't know. That's weird. I don't know how to put that together with the proper understanding of the doctrine of God. Again, maybe this is like in the, I don't know. I don't want to say univocism, getting in the realm of that, where you again could be the case that it just kind of seems like we're making God into this big man, right? This big, strong, smart man that's way stronger, way smarter than anyone else, and that just, that to me speaks of Zeus. It doesn't speak of the God of the Bible.
God's not decreeing the rapist to rape on our system. God's not decreeing the molester to molest on our system. So it's very easy for us to love his decree, because his decree doesn't encompass the moral, heinous evil of the world. Why? But
he knows about the rapist, right? He knows about the rapist. You would agree with that because you affirm exhaustive foreknowledge. So, I mean, I know we're getting kind of into the realm of a theodicy here, but I don't know why it's a good thing to say that he doesn't decree these things, right? That these things are purposeless, although he allows them to happen, right? And you might say, well, that's, I don't know how you go about that. I mean, it seems like the only way that he would allow it to happen is because he doesn't want to disturb the free will of the rapist. I don't know. That doesn't even make any sense to me, right? But if you can say that the rapist is within God's decree, then you can say there are redeeming factors within that rape that we may not understand, right? But they do come about nonetheless, because things don't fall out without purpose. They don't happen without purpose. I think that's just the better route to take. I mean, you can disagree with that. That's perfectly fine. And you can clarify what you mean there, and that's perfectly fine as well.
1 John 2:16 says, the pride of man and the lust of the flesh is not from the Father, but from the world. But Calvinists teach it is from the divine decree, the determinative will of God.
No. It's not from the divine decree. It is found within the divine decree, yes, but it is from the agent in creation. Remember, all of the decree falls out via providence. Providence includes direct and indirect works of God, and also secondary causations, free and contingent secondary causations of agents within creation. Right, so it's not that these things come from God. They're not from the Father. They are from mankind, but they are yet still controlled by the providence of God as his decree is brought about. Right, but within that decree, everything is brought about again freely and contingently. Remember, we're Reformed. We're not, at least the vast majority of us are not necessitarian. Right. We're not all necessitarians are fatalists, but I think that gets a lot closer than like say a compatibilist. But freedom and contingency are a thing within the Reformed world that has to be accounted for, right? The vast majority of the Reformed believe in freedom and contingency. Well, let's continue.
To bring all things to pass, which would include, by the way, the pride and the lust of man. And we just simply reject that. We believe that's not a biblical theology. We don't believe that's from the Bible. We believe that's from Edwards and Calvin. It's from man. It's a man-centered doctrine because it is centered upon a doctrine created by man, not founded in the pages of Scripture.
Oh, Leighton, come on now. I mean, you know we have a biblical case for it. Yeah, I don't think that's a good thing to go at. In fact, let's do a little bit of Bible here. Let me pull up a passage of scripture here. Okay, now we've got this pulled up. This is 2 Kings chapter 19. And we're going to have God give a message by way of Isaiah to King Hezekiah about Assyria. Okay, so starting in verse 20 here, you have, then Isaiah, the son of Amos, sent to Hezekiah saying, thus says the Lord. Okay, so here's words given from God, the God of Israel. Your prayer about me, your prayer to me about Sennacherib, king of Assyria, I have heard. This is the word that the Lord has spoken concerning him. So this is talking about Assyria. So Leighton's talking about like the determination of things. I just want to show some, a section here of scripture. There are others, Isaiah 10, which also deals with Assyria, but you could also go to the story of Joseph and the crucifixion, all kind of stuff. Crucifixion, I think, is a big one, but this is one that doesn't get talked about a lot. And I just want to kind of point it out. So about Assyria, God says this: she despises you, she scorns you, right? The virgin daughter of Zion, she wags her head behind you, the daughter of Jerusalem. Whom have you mocked and reviled? Against whom have you raised your voice, then lifted your eyes to the heights? Against the Holy One of Israel. By your messengers you have mocked the Lord, and you have said. Now, here in verse 23, we have what Assyria has said, right? He's ascribing this to the king of Assyria, Sennacherib, the king of Assyria in specific, but this is like the nation of Assyria. This is what's being ascribed to what they say. With my many chariots, I have gone up the heights of the mountains to the far recesses of Lebanon. I have felled its tallest cedars, its choicest cypress. I entered its farthest lodging place, its most fruitful forest. I dug wells. I drank foreign waters. I dried up with the soil of my foot all the streams of Egypt. So you see the boasting here that the king is doing, or that Assyria, the nation, is doing. Like, who are we? What do? We conquer nations. This is what we do. And I take my chariots and I go up and I destroy other nations. Right? I felled its tallest cedars. These are the soldiers. It doesn't matter who you send against me, they're going down. Its choicest cypress. It doesn't matter. We're going to take you down. I entered its farthest lodging places. You can't keep me out of your house. Its most fruitful forest. I take the resources I want, is what he's saying. Right? I dug wells. They are mine. What you had, you thought it was yours. I took it. I drank your waters. I took everything that you have. I dried up with the sole of my foot all the streams of Egypt. I can't be taken back. So this is boasting from the king of Assyria here. Now, God comes in verse 25, and he says this to the king of Assyria. Now, Assyria was a pagan nation. These are not people of God, right? And here's what God says about them. So this would be like, if you put this in context of like what Leighton's talking about, these would have been like terrible, evil events that happen when you have a country or a nation that goes and destroys and rapes and pillages and steals the resources of another nation, right? This is what is happening with Assyria. And God says this about the boasting from Assyria: have you not heard that I determined it long ago? I planned from days of old what now I bring to pass. That the you here is the king of Assyria. It is the nation as they go out and they do these things. That you should turn fortified cities into heaps of ruins, while their inhabitants, shorn of strength, are dismayed and confounded, and have become like plants of the field and like tender grass, like grass on the housetops, blighted before it is grown. So the idea here is that, because the Assyria is boasting about all these conquests that they have, and God says, "Wait a minute, did you not know that this is something I determined? In other words, I planned it, right?" And that's what he says: "I planned from days of old. What now I bring to pass." Right? You don't do anything, Assyria, without me. And what is it that God has determined, planned, and brought about? That Assyria should turn fortified cities into heaps of ruins. Now, you might have an argument when it comes to Isaiah 10, where God uses Assyria as the rod of his judgment, right, against Israel, right? Because of this nation has gone astray, God's going to use Assyria in order to punish her, right? Okay, you got a little bit of a you don't have much there, but you can like argue that God was using a people according to his purposes for the judgment of another people. But here in 2 Kings 19, God is saying that every single conquest that Assyria had was determined, planned, and brought about by him. Now, what does that mean? Again, secondary causation, freedom, and contingency. We're not saying that God put some kind of spirit into Assyria that makes them go out and they like do these things as automatons, right? Robots or something like that. No, Assyria freely does this stuff, right? This is who they are. They are people, just like it says in Isaiah 10. They are people who conquer other nations, right? But God is saying that nothing that you've done apart from my determination and planning, right? You do these things according to my will, in other words. Right, so it's not as though there isn't a biblical case for God determining things, right? And I'll absolutely agree with Leighton. That's a bad thing if we destroy freedom and contingency, but we don't. Like in this section, we're not saying that God has Assyria like puppet on strings, right? We're saying that God had planned for Assyria to do what they did, and there was a purpose in it. Although it included evil and wicked things, right? There was still purpose in what took place in their conquering, in a way that, although we can't see it, it's there, right? Because God had planned it, he had determined it, he brought it to pass, and it has to do with redemptive history. I think it has to do with what Romans 8 says, right? That all things are worked out for for those that love God. Right? All things work for the good of those that love God. That even in the wicked things, there is that which is being worked out for the good of redemptive history, right? That the entirety of human history all moves in that direction of redemptive history. So I don't know why it's a bad thing that God plans these things, determines these things, and brings them about in a way that is free and contingent, right, through secondary causation. But again, I digress. I'll go back to Leighton here in a second. Let me get this out of the way. I just wanted to show you all 2 Kings 19 and that section where we absolutely have God determining, planning, and bringing about all of the fortified cities that had been turned into heaps of ruins by the Assyrian nation, a pagan nation, right? God's there. He's there, right? All right, so let's get back to Leighton. All right, so now we got Leighton back up. Let's continue.
And so we're standing up against what we believe is against the scripture and defining God's decree as determinism, theistic determinism, like James White and other Calvinists have done, and then accusing us of hating God's decree because we reject divine determinism is again just fallacious on its front. And so we are hating, if you want to put the word hate in there, we are hating people misdefining God's decrees as being that which he sovereignly and unchangeably decrees molestations and rapes and murders and horrible, heinous evil.
Yeah, like that passage I just pointed out where God had decreed and brought about the destruction of nations by a pagan nation. Wonder what those pagans were doing. What do you think the Assyrians were doing when they were going in and turning fortified cities into heaps of ruins? Do you think they were like taking care of folks and putting them up in hotels or something like that? Or do you think maybe they were pillaging, right? Raping, murdering, probably killing children, right? Heinous stuff. Along with the fact, and I know a lot of Calvinists bring this up, and it's just absolutely true, and Leighton doesn't like it, but crucifixion of Christ, the only innocent man to walk the face of the earth, murdered, right? And all brought about by the determinate plan of God.
As we've read dozens of times on this broadcast, and will continue to bring to the attention of others, Jeremiah 19:5, in fact, even in the ESV version, even in the favorite translation of the Calvinists, says when they're burning their children to Molech, he says, I did not command, nor did I decree this. So that's one instance in where the Bible.
Well, yeah, God didn't tell the people to burn their children. Again, that doesn't take that outside the realm of God's eternal decree. His eternal decree is something that's not revealed to us. Like we get snippets of it in the Bible, like I showed you a minute ago in 2 Kings. We get like you could say that's like pulling the curtain back a little bit, giving us a peek behind the curtain at that point. But yeah, he did not command nor decree that those people do that. The eternal decree, though, is something altogether different. And within that, remember what I have to keep bringing up is that even that decree is brought about by free and contingent acts, right? Of agents within creation, right? Secondary causation. You can't like just dismiss that. You just cannot do it. You can't think of God as a puppet master. I know that's a straw man that likes to be thrown out there, but it's absolutely ridiculous, right? I'm not saying you have to believe what I'm saying. I'm not saying you have to become a determinist. That's not the point, right? But the point is that like if you want to engage with those that are theistic determinists, at least the majority of theistic determinists, then you need to do so in a way that is in line with what it is that they profess.
Says that's something God did not decree, and yet you have the Westminster and the London Baptist Confession of Faith saying God decrees whatsoever comes to pass. So I'm going to go with Jeremiah, who is writing under inspiration what the words of God are.
Yeah, I think that's a false dichotomy, at least from our perspective. You can disagree, that's fine, but again, just don't blatantly misrepresent us. I know it's kind of a play on his title here, but yeah, okay.
I did not decree this. And I'm not going to go with what John Calvin or Edwards or White teaches. God decrees whatsoever comes to pass. And so if you want to say that I hate anything, I hate when people redefine what the Bible says to fit their theological worldview. I do hate that. I think God hates that. I think God hates it when people say that good is evil and evil is good. When you take something that's good and you call it evil.
We're not saying evil is good and good is evil. We're saying that evil within God's decree has purpose. It's still evil, right? It's still evil. It's still brought about by secondary causations, by agents within creation, freely and contingently, right? The evil itself has its origin, if you will, within the creature. You might not like that, but that's the source of it. The source of the evil is not God, yet that evil is found within God's eternal decree. Again, the plan, something doesn't exert force on the add extra outside of God. The decree is not forcing this stuff to be brought about.
Or you take something that's evil and call it good. I think God hates that. And so whenever you say that something that somebody does is because God sovereignly and unchangeably decreed for them to do it, I think you've taken something that's purely evil and bad and from the world, and you have said, no, God sovereignly and unchangeably decreed for that thing to come to pass for his good pleasure and his will. You have taken something that is demonstrably evil and you have called it.
Well, yeah, it's for his good purposes and his plan. But I mean, again, I'll bring up Romans 8 when it says that all things work for the good of those who love God. So I think it's because of redemptive history, right? This is how God planned for things to come about. And again, I'm just going to keep being redundant here. I'm going to keep repeating this over and over again. Comes about, all these things come about freely and contingently. Not necessarily, right? All right.
Good, i.e., a purpose and plan of God for his glorification. That is a good thing by definition. And you have called molestation, rape, murder, all these heinous evil things good.
No, we haven't. We don't call those things good. Yeah.
By calling them a decree of God for his glory. That is calling that which is evil good.
No, that's not calling what is evil good. That's just saying that evil as a purpose is not something that is unaccounted for or simply a byproduct of creation itself without any purpose, right? So,
and that is bad. That is wrong. That is being called out. I do hate that. I admit that is something I do hate. Absolutely hate it. And I think we should stand against it. And I think Calvinists can be well-intending and they're striving to defend the Word of God, but at the same time do so unbiblically. They can come to false conclusions based upon philosophical, finite reasoning instead of good exegetical commentary through the Scriptures. And I think that's what some Calvinists have done. What I want to really emphasize here is that one of the things that we appreciate is when Calvinists stand up against the ills of this world, which James White is known for. James White is an apologist. He stands up against the liberal and secular movement of our society today, which is becoming more and more secular, more and more against the principles of Christian theology and Christian values. I listen occasionally to Dr. White's Dividing Line program, and I resonate with a lot of what he says, standing up against the cultural shifts that have taken place in our society, and standing up against abortion and against many of the social issues that come up regularly on his program. And again, I agree with a lot of those things, but his theology, his soteriology, the basis of his entire way of thinking, I believe, contradicts and flies in the face of all of the things that he says with regard to the culture and with regard to society and secular lurking. I think that absolutely we have to stand against what the secular society is doing. But the reason I think we have to stand against it is because they're acting in contradiction with the will of God. They're not acting in accordance with a sovereign and unchangeable will of God, as is entailed within the Calvinistic worldview, especially when you have their two decrees of God kind of situation, or two wills of God kind of situation, their decreative will versus the prescriptive will. That which he says on the outside, I don't want you to become secular. But yet he is sovereignly and unchangeably decreed for you to become secular, causally decreed it, in fact. He's not just knowing it's going to happen and then allowing it. He has actually planned and purposed and sovereignly decreed all of the secular things that White spends hours upon hours bemoaning.
Just like when we read a minute ago in 2 Kings 19, that God had planned, or he had determined, planned, and brought about all of the conquests of the pagan nation Assyria. Yeah.
And speaking out against. And I'm simply trying to ask, how is that consistent logically? How is it consistent theologically? The reason we stand against the ills of this world is because they are acting in complete, utter rebellion of the will of God.
Now, see, this is 100% false. And I can prove that really quickly here, Leighton. I want you to follow me on this, right? So I brought up 2 Kings 19. I didn't bring up Isaiah 10, right? But you know what it says in Isaiah 10. I'm not going to bring up the passage on the screen here, but I want to bring it up and read it anyway. I don't want it to get, I can't spell. I'm going to bring it up here so I can be more accurate with quoting it. I don't simply want to paraphrase it. I want to quote it. So I'll pick it up in verse 5. Leighton knows exactly where I'm going here. He knows Isaiah 10. He knows what I'm going to say. But I'm going to make a point with it. So woe to Assyria, the rod of my anger, the staff in their hands is my fury. This is God. Against the godless nation I send him. So this is God sending Assyria, using Assyria as a rod of judgment against Israel. Israel was being they were being terrible at this point, just like they normally were in the Old Testament, right? They were rebellious and terrible people, right? But here we have God using Assyria as his rod of anger, his staff of judgment against Assyria. Against the godless nation I send him, and against the people of my wrath I command him to take spoil and seize plunder, and to tread them down like the mire in the streets. Okay, Leighton, I got a question here with you, because you're talking about these like the reason we know things are bad is because we know these are things that go directly against what God God's like even his unrevealed will, right? His secret will, if you will. Well, we have the curtain pulled back here in Isaiah 10 to an event in history, right? So we could liken this event to an event that we might see today. So I want you to put yourself, Leighton, in the time of Israel when Assyria was being sent as the judgment of God against them. Right now, I want you to think about what that would look like to have a pagan nation come into the nation of Israel and to tread down the Israelites in the street. What do you think that means? Again, I'm going to say, do you think that means that God sent some people in there and they were like, oh, you've been kind of bad. We're gonna put you over here for a little while, and we're gonna tie you up, and we're not gonna tie your hands too tight, though. We don't want to hurt you. No, this is a pagan nation that came in that killed Israelites. That killed a bunch of people, that took a bunch of people captive, that took plunder, that took spoils. If you see that happening, right? If you see that happening without knowing specifically that this was God, judging Israel, you would call that what? Evil, wicked, right? Another nation coming in and killing people and trampling them down the streets. You would say that'd be terrible. I mean, it would basically be like if we could liken it to something today, it wouldn't be any different than if we saw the nation of Iran attack the nation of Israel, right? And actually kill a bunch of Israelis, bomb and kill children, come in and take a bunch of stuff from the nation of Israel, right? If we saw that happen today, what would we call that? We would call it wicked and evil, because it is. Just like it was wicked and evil for Assyria to do what they did to the nation of Israel in Isaiah 10. It is wickedness. It is evil. Yet we know in Isaiah 10 that it was according to the will of God, right? His secret will. This is his will of decree. This is what he had this is the way that he was judging Israel at the time. We're getting a peek behind the curtain into how God works. Right? So I'm not saying that you have to go out there and say that anything's good that is evil. Absolutely not. There's nothing wrong with saying that what Assyria did in Isaiah 10 when it comes to trampling people down the streets was evil. Right? It was wicked stuff. Was that judgment? Absolutely. But it's still wicked, still evil. I mean, we can't call it anything different. If we saw it today, we'd say that. What would be the difference today between Iran destroying and coming in and trampling down the nation of Israel with what Assyria did if you didn't have Isaiah 10? Or what Assyria did with Israel in Isaiah 10 and you didn't have Isaiah 10? What would be the difference? It wouldn't be any difference, would it? I want you to think about that, right? Think about what that looks like. You can say, well, God used a pagan nation to do his to mitigate out his judgment. Couldn't that be the same with Iran and Israel? Of course it could, right? You can't say it wouldn't be, right? We're just saying that we look at how God presents his interactions with creature with his creation in the Bible, and we'll say this is how God is. Right? This is how things come about. But again, I'm going to bring it up again. This all falls out, happens freely and contingently. Right? It wasn't this necessary thing that comes about. There are secondary causations in play. Assyria is 100% responsible for the wickedness that they did. In fact, they get punished because they actually went farther than they should have, if you will. Was that still within God's decree? Of course it was. Of course it was. But God used it to judge the king of Assyria, the nation of Assyria. Right? secondary causations. The decree is brought about through providence, through free and contingent acts of creatures. All of that has to be kept in mind as you go through these things. But it's just absolutely without a doubt, a peek behind the curtain of how God acts, if you will, in creation. Right, of how his providence brings things about. Like, I don't think that Isaiah 10 came about, and it was the fact that God was like, "Oh, okay, Israel's being bad. Let me think about what I can do." No, that's not it. Right? This was all part of God's plan from before the foundation of the world. Right? Brought about in a providential fashion through free and contingent secondary causes. Right? Just please keep that in mind. All right, back to Leighton.
They are not acting in accordance with his sovereign and unchangeable will that they can't ultimately control, because he's sovereignly and unchangeably decreed what they will from the very beginning. Now, we've written on this subject before in confronting even John Piper and some of these same kinds of things. And I wrote this years ago. It says this: a Calvinist sent me a note on Facebook stating in part, "Why are you standing in opposition to God and his ways? You should not disapprove of his sovereign plan and purposes." Now, ironically, I believe it is the Calvinist, at least the consistent Calvinist, who so often expresses disapproval of God and his plans. Allow me to demonstrate what I mean. The same Calvinistic friend recently tweeted this message in response to yet another atrocious event in the news. And I'm not mentioning the actual event because I don't want to over-theologize something that may have affected one of you even personally here on the program who may be watching this. So he tweeted this, a Calvinistic friend of mine tweeted this: horrified over the senseless act of violence and evil. Now, I liked his message because I too am horrified by the heinously evil behavior of some people in our world. And I have no doubt that this Calvinistic friend genuinely feels the same way. I have purposefully not mentioned that actual event because I do not wish to theologize the personal pain of those touched by such grief, as I just mentioned. However, if our theology is to be practical, we must be able to consistently speak into the issues from our theological worldview.
Okay, Leighton. Yeah, could it not be the case that we can, at the exact same time, say that that event was part of God's decree, and say that that event was a senseless act of evil? Think about it, by what I've said like numerous times already in this video. Of course we can. Of course we can. Right? Yes, that is part of God's decree. It is something that has purpose that we will more than likely never know what the purpose is within redemptive history. And at the same time, that evil act was brought about freely and contingently through wicked people. Right? And when it comes to that secondary causation, the intentions of the people who do it, what the event itself was pointed toward, it is a senseless act of evil. You might not like that, but it's definitely the case. That's why it's no problem for a Calvinist to do a funeral of a child that dies for a say somebody's 8-year-old daughter or son has an accident. Does the Calvinist believe that's part of God's decree? Of course. Of course. We believe that God has our days numbered. Do you think that's something that we should bring to that's the theology we should bring to the parents of the child who's gone? Or should we be alongside them and mourn in the truth that a sweet child of theirs has been taken from them at a way too early stage for us? I mean, that's not a problem. That there's no problem there. You should, and I don't think you disagree with that at all, right? So I don't know why you would want to push like you are about Calvinists shouldn't ever say that things are wicked or good just because we believe that God decrees all things.
Which brings me to the question of this article: should Christians ever express disapproval or disgust for God's self-glorifying will and plan? Let me ask that question.
For the plan, no. Right? For the plan, no. Of course not. For God's decree, no. For the acts themselves, yes. Absolutely yes. If I was around in the day when Assyria was destroying Israel, and I got you like pause in a bad place. If I was around in the day when Assyria was destroying Israel, even if I understood that to be God's judgment, because I could be like, well, I've seen some Israelites and their idolatry and the way that they do things that they shouldn't do. So, you could kind of see God's judgment was coming. I would still say that that's an evil thing, that when the Assyrians go and trample these folks down in the streets, right? So yeah, while God's decree and his plan, we don't express disapproval or disgust for what God has decreed. We express disapproval and disgust for what secondary agents do, right? For their intentions, for their evil and wicked intentions in what they do. All right.
For God's self-glorifying will and plan. Let me ask that question again and let it sink in. Let it really sink in what I'm asking. Should Christians, people who believe in Christ, who follow God, who believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who trust in him, who believe in him, should we ever knowingly express disapproval and disgust for what we believe is God's self-glorifying plan and his will? Should we ever stand up against it and say, your will is bad, God? Your will is disgusting, God. I disapprove of your will and your plan. Should we ever do that?
Nope, shouldn't do it.
I say no to that, okay? What do Calvinists say? Expressions of disapproval about things that have come to pass do cause me pause when brought by Calvinistic believers. Why? Think about it. I cannot help but question the logical consistency of Calvinists who express feelings of indignation and disapproval over such atrocities as the actual claims of their doctrinal worldview.
Again, that's because you don't even allow for the possibility of secondary causation for any freedom or contingency within a Calvinistic system, which is just absolutely strange because it's all throughout the history, right? It's all throughout the tradition. I mean, it's just it's there. It's not absent whatsoever. But yet you're like, well, I don't think it matters. Well, it doesn't. With all due respect, Leighton, it doesn't matter what you think. Right? It doesn't matter what we claim. There has been many a gallon of ink spilled on the freedom and contingency found within a reformed system. Many. Right? You may disagree on what we call freedom. That's fine. That discussion should be there. I don't think anyone should beg the question on what freedom is. Ironically, libertarian free will proponents do beg the question on what freedom is. Right? They would just say it's just libertarian free will. They don't even defend it. Just say it is. Right? So that is begging the question. If you want to have that discussion, we can have that discussion. But yeah, I don't think anyone should just beg the question on what freedom is. You should be able to give some idea of it. But so I'm not asking you just to take us, at face value when we say freedom and contingency. If you want to push back on that, fine. But don't just leave it out. Don't just throw out secondary causation like, I don't think that should be there. Well, that again, it doesn't matter what you think. It's there in the tradition. It's in the confessions, plain as day. If you want to engage with Calvinism, you have to deal with that in some way, right? And it's fine. You can deal with it. We can have a discussion about it, but just you can't just leave it out like you are here.
Now, Calvinism teaches that God has sovereignly planned and brought about every meticulous detail, including the evil intentions of his creatures. In order, and this is
how is it brought about? like a puppet master in strings? I know that's what you believe. like programming a computer and letting robots go. I know that's what you believe, but that's not what. Sorry about your face there. That's not what the confessions say, is it? That's not what the tradition says. It's not what Calvinists say.
The evil intentions of his creatures, in order, and this is in order to glorify himself. In other words, if Calvinism is true, the shooting, which horrified my Calvinistic friend, and even since that, all the burning of the cities and all the atrocities, the mistreatment of African Americans by police officers, all of these things that people speak out against, everything that horrifies Calvinists and Arminians alike and provisionists alike, they were planned, according to Calvinism, they were planned and brought about by God.
Bam. Of course. Just like the 2 Kings passage we looked at earlier. Right? When the pagan king of Assyria says, he's beating his chest saying, I go into places, I destroy these places, I take all their resources, I kill all their armies. You can send the best guys you got at me. They can't stand before me. Right? All the conquests of the pagan nation of Syria, he's boasting about it. And God says, hold up. Did you not know that I determined this long ago? I planned this, what I now bring about, right? That's God speaking about providence, about who he is as the creator of the universe. Not even a pagan nation has the right to boast of some autonomous will of their own, right? That is completely separate from God. Right now, I'm not saying God directly caused all of those things. It's not what I'm saying. I know that's what you want to think I'm saying, Leighton. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that it was brought about according to providence, according to God's plan, his decree, and it comes about in a way that is free and contingent. In other words, the pagans do exactly as they desire to do. Right? They want to do this stuff, but God is like saying, you can't even boast about that, you pagan nation. Anyway.
For his own self-glorification, mind you. So in actuality, it is the Calvinist who is expressing disapproval of God's plans and his will, not me. I'm expressing disapproval of man's autonomously evil choices, which stand diametrically opposed to God and his plan. And
yeah, just like the autonomous choices of Assyria to go attack Israel in Isaiah 10, or Assyria to go attack any other nation that they conquered according to 2 Kings 19, right? Or maybe it was the autonomous choices of Pilate and the high priest in Jerusalem when they crucified Christ, the only innocent man to walk the face of the earth. I guess it was their autonomous choices, even though it says that all of that was brought about according to God's determinate plan. Yeah, okay, whatever. Again, I think we're getting in the Bible a look behind the curtain of how God works that doesn't destroy secondary causation. It doesn't destroy freedom. It doesn't destroy contingency, right? Rather, it establishes it. That's what the confessions say. And you just completely throw that out the window. Don't ever deal with it. You don't ever deal with it. And I don't know why. That's why I just keep saying it over and over and over in this video. We do not deny freedom and contingency. Right? We don't deny secondary causation. It's right within the tradition. It's within all the Reformed writings, and it's within the confessions themselves that we hold to. Right?
Autonomously evil choices, which stand diametrically opposed to God and his plan and his will and his purposes. Now, my Calvinistic friend is expressing horrified disapproval of that which he believes, he teaches that God actually planned for his own self-glorification. How can he do so?
He keeps bringing up the self-glorification. Yeah, God is glorified by this, but I mean, we don't believe that God is any more God doesn't have any more glory post-creation than he had pre-creation. He is glorious to the maximum extent. So I don't know what you mean exactly by saying that he does this for his own glorification. It's like he's greedy and he wants something. I don't know. He doesn't gain anything. It's not as though he changed upon creation. He doesn't become better now that creation is. He doesn't become better now that all these things fall out, right? This is the whole idea in redemption in the entire history of the world is that God is revealing himself as the glorious one. Right? So anyway.
Consistently. Now, here's where I have an objection anticipated. What do I mean by that? It's like a diatribe. It's like when you anticipate what your listener is going to be saying. So I'm anticipating what some of you.
I don't remember this part. Let's see. Let's see if he anticipates what I've said so far.
Who are Calvinist might be saying in response to this. Okay. Here is where I'm often met with the accusation of misrepresentation, or what is known as the fallacy of strawmanning. I suspect, however, that those bringing this accusation either, one, do not rightly understand Calvinism and the Calvinistic scholars' actual claims, or
no, I definitely understand Calvinism. I understand the Calvinistic scholars' actual claims. I do. Yeah, absolutely do.
Or two, they do not really affirm the actual claims of John Calvin and most of the Calvinistic scholars, like Jonathan Edwards and others.
Yeah, I understand Calvin. That's why I explained earlier why Calvin believes in freedom and contingency and how he defended Luther by smoothing out the rough language of Luther that Luther left behind in his writings, right? Yeah, I think I understand it. I've read them. Yeah.
But have adopted a much milder, more palatable, and arguably inconsistent form of the systematic. If it is the second, however, I cannot help but wonder why they would not stand with me in opposition to the actual claims of Calvinism, rather than accusing me of not understanding it rightly.
Well, I mean, you kind of bring that on yourself. Like, have you brought up one time in this freedom and contingency, secondary causation? Did you bring it up? Do the confessions expressly state those things? They do. They absolutely do. You brought up the confession, but all you bring up is God decreed all things, right? See, so I mean, this misrepresentation label actually fits because you bring up what you want out of the confession and you disregard what you don't want to deal with. But I'm saying that you have to deal with that, right? If you want to actually engage with Calvinism and Calvinistic scholars, you got to deal with it, Leighton. You got to deal with what the confessions actually say, and they absolutely explicitly say that freedom and contingency is found within secondary causation. This is how God brings things about, even though we don't understand exactly how that is, right? We give there's a lot of negative language in the confessions, but they absolutely affirm that freedom is not taken away, contingency is not taken away. It says rather they are established. So I mean, yeah, if you would have dealt with that at all, then maybe the label misrepresentation wouldn't be there. But I think I have made it utterly clear throughout this video that you do not deal with that. You didn't in this video whatsoever. And I dealt with it in a biblical fashion too. I dealt with two different passages, 2 Kings 19 and Isaiah 10. Right? All right, let's continue.
For instance, consider the quote from John Piper's ministry website, which many of you have heard dozens of times, so I'm not going to read it again, but it's ultimately saying, God brings about, yes, even the sexual abuse of a young child for his own self-glorification. Everything is in accordance with his will. Everything is.
I'm looking at it there. Let's see. Let me. It's hard to read. God brings about all things in accordance with his will. In other words, it isn't just that God manages to turn the evil aspects of our world to good for those who love him. It is rather that he himself brings about these evil aspects for his glory and his people's good. This includes, as incredible as and as unacceptable as it may currently seem, God's having even brought about Nazis' brutality at Birkenau and Auschwitz, as well as the terrible killings of Dennis Rader and even the sexual abuse of a young child. Okay, so Piper does say there for his glory. I think I understand what he means. I don't think that he means the exact same thing Leighton's getting at. The glory of God there is just simply the revelation of who he is as the glorious one. It's not like God is narcissistic in that he's trying to gain something, become better than he was. It's that he is revealing who he is, and that's what his glory means there. Anyway, let's continue.
In accordance with his plan, and there's the link. You can see it in its context. I welcome you to go there. On the one hand, we know that Piper has at times expressed disappointment and disgust for the Holocaust and the sexual abuse of children.
Yes, yes. Like, I agree with what Piper said in the prior quote, and I agree with what Piper does when he expresses disappointment and disgust with the Holocaust and sexual abuse of children. Again, it's because there are secondary causations. There is freedom and contingency within this world. Something, again, you can't deny that we hold to that, and that's how this comes about. While it may be the case that the Holocaust and the sexual abuse of a child are part of God's decree, because they are something that falls out within creation, and they have a purpose that we can't understand, but works toward the redemption of the world in some way. At the exact same time, we can express disdain, disappointment, disgust for the Holocaust and the sexual abuse of children, because those things are despicable and disgusting, right? They just are. They have a value in this world that is disgusting. They are evil. They are wicked. We can call it that, right? We don't call it that because God decreed it, right? We call it that because those things are brought about by evil and wicked people, right? So they are evil, wicked, and disgusting. This isn't rocket science here. Again, you just have to remember we believe in freedom and contingency.
Of course he would. Wouldn't every Christian on Twitter, James White, regularly on his program, would express disgust of the Holocaust, of sexual abuse of children, of shootings, of the burning of cities, of the mistreatment of African Americans. He has denounced all of those things regularly on his program, and rightly so, should. But on the other hand, in his systematic theology, he claims that these same exact events that he's showing disapproval and disgust for have been brought about by a God seeking his own glory and for his own glory, expressly for his own glory. Therefore, Piper, along with White,
I'd like to know what you mean when you say for and expressly for his own glory, right? It's about the revelation of who God is, right? He doesn't gain glory from it. But anyway, I've brought up already 2 examples in this video from the Bible that tell us that God explicitly determined, planned, and brought about what we would consider evil acts. It'd be no different than us seeing a nation coming into another nation and destroying it and trampling people down in the streets, right? And we are told that God determined, planned, and brought those things about. I don't know what you do with that. I have no idea what you do with that, right? Or you're trying to say that in your day, without having the revelation of 2 Kings 19 or Isaiah 10, if you saw what happens in those passages, you would say, hey, those are all part of God's decree. He actually brought it about, so those are good things. No, you would say they're evil and wicked, right? There's not a problem there, because they were evil and wicked. They were brought about by wicked and evil men.
Edwards and other Calvinists are expressing disapproval and disgust for what they believe God has planned and brought about for his own good purposes and will and glorification. As I said, Calvinists are the ones who are expressing disapproval of God's plans and his purposes and his.
Yeah, I mean, this is easy again to make this. This is like a redundant video. I'm sorry, but it's easy to make this argument from Leighton because he just absolutely just like skips right over the fact that freedom, contingency, responsibility, moral responsibility, and culpability are all part of the Calvinistic system, even under the umbrella of theistic determinism. Right. So, I mean, yeah, if you deny all of that, you don't deal with all of that, and you just say God caused and brought this about, right? If you just stop there, it's a pretty easy argument to make, I think. But you got to deal with the system itself.
Will, not me. John Calvin himself taught, creatures are so governed by the secret counsel of God that nothing happens but what he has knowingly and willingly decreed. Thieves and murderers and other evildoers are instruments of divine providence being employed by the Lord himself to execute judgments which he.
Divine providence is brought about how, Leighton? How did the confessions say it? How does the Reformed tradition say it? Even prior to the confessions being penned, right? Freely and contingently, with culpability of those agents within that secondary causation, right? But we're not going to deal with that.
He has resolved to inflict, we hold that God is the disposer and ruler of all things, and that from the remotest eternity, according to his own wisdom, he decreed what he was to do, and now by his power executes what he decreed. Hence we maintain that by his providence, not heaven and earth and eminent creatures only, but also the counsels and wills of men, notice that, the wills of men are so governed as to move exactly in the course which he has destined. In other words, when you will to sin, it is in the course which God has destined for you to sin.
That's true. Yeah, I'm not going to deny that. Again, I'll say it one more time at least, probably more than this. Freely and contingently, right? You're culpable for that willing of that sin, even though that willing of that sin is found within the decree of God.
And to will. So when you have pride, which the Bible says is not from the Father, but from the world, John Calvin says it's as God has destined it to be. It is within his.
Yeah, but it's still from the world and not from God. Calvin would agree with that. I know you don't know how, but yep, secondary causation. Yep, that's how. Right? It comes about in a way that is free and contingent. I'm getting tired of saying free and contingent, but I'm going to keep saying it because he never does.
Decreed will. It is under his sovereign control. He has brought it to pass unchangeably. The devil and the whole train of the ungodly.
Like, what does it mean to bring it to pass? It's like he keeps begging the question on this and what it means. It's marionette, right? Puppeteering strings from his point of view, right? Not from the Calvinist point of view.
Calvin goes on to write, are in all directions held in by the hand of God as with a bridle, so that they can neither conceive any mischief, nor plan what they have conceived, nor how much soever they may have planned, move a single finger to perpetrate, unless insofar as he permits, nay, unless insofar as he commands, that they are not only bound by his fetters, but are even forced to do him service, end quote. It is very wicked, he goes on to write in another discourse, merely to investigate the causes of God's will, for his will is, and rightly ought to be, the cause of all things that are. So what is the cause of all things that are, according to John Calvin? God's will, God's purpose. And yet, John Calvin, as well as other Calvinists, speak out against what they believe is God's self-glorifying will. How is that consistent?
Yeah, I'm not going to get into this because this was like from the first of the video and I've already dealt with it. I'm just going to keep going.
I have not seen a good explanation as how it is consistent. And you can see as I'm scrolling through these.
Well, I hope that you watch this video, Leighton, then, because I've given you a good explanation, historically accurate explanation for how it's consistent.
Quote after quote after quote after quote, even Adam's fall was the will of God. It was the decree of God. The first man.
Well, I mean, right. I mean, why would you even think that's controversial? It says that all things come about according to the decree of God, right? That whatsoever comes to pass, God has decreed. I don't know what that excludes. It doesn't exclude anything. Remember that the confession doesn't stop there, right? It makes other claims, negative and mainly negative, like whatever it means, it doesn't mean this, right? Whatever it means, it doesn't mean that freedom and contingency are taken away. Or rather, it means that it's established because God is the first cause, establishes all other causes, which includes secondary causes. But yet secondary causes come about freely and contingently.
And fell because the Lord deemed he meet that he should. The fall itself, according to John Calvin, was planned and purposed and brought to pass causally by God. Even though God, by eternal providence, Calvin writes, man has been created to.
You'll notice Calvin says providence a lot, right? Which is what I've been bringing up. That the God's decree is not what exerts force upon creation. That how God's decree comes about is through providence. And I have said numerous times that providence includes direct and indirect acts of God, and it absolutely includes, by necessity, secondary causations, the free and contingent acts of agents within creation, right? That's why Calvin says providence over and over and over. That's what he means, right? He doesn't mean like for Leighton's stuff to be right here. Calvin would need to mean by providence a puppeteer, which he doesn't. Like the Reformed tradition doesn't mean that at all. Right? There probably some wacko internet Calvinists out there that mean that, right? Some really hard determinists that mean that. But whatever. I mean, if you want to go attack them, go attack them. That's fine. But don't bring this type of argument to any kind of learned Calvinist.
To undergo that calamity to which he is subject, it still takes on occasion from man himself, not from God, since the only reason for his ruin is that it has denigrated from God's pure creation into vicarious and impugn perversity. Now, before moving on, I go on to write, I hope that those who proudly wear the label Calvinist can rightly understand what I'm opposing here. I've not misrepresented or strawman Calvinism.
Yeah, you have. I mean, I like you, Leighton. We're buddies, we're friends. I mean, I don't have any personal thing against you, but yeah, you have, and I explain why. Because you never once dealt with the fact that Calvinists believe in freedom and contingency, right? Which moral culpability, that God is not the author of sin. Right? All these things are within the confession, and like you just we're not going to deal with those. All I want to deal with and talk about is God decreed all things. Okay. Then you're not engaging with Calvinism proper.
John Piper is arguably the most influential modern day proponent of Calvinism, and he represented exactly what John Calvin himself taught on the subject in the quotes above, which are all properly cited for contextual examination. And I encourage you to go look at the context of all of the quotes. Both of these Calvinistic scholars are abundantly clear about what they believe. And I'm not suggesting that a Calvinist must agree with John Piper or Jonathan Edwards or James White or even John Calvin on every theological point in order to be considered a Calvinist. But if you're going to proudly promote this label, shouldn't you at least affirm at least the basic theological claims over the issues that make Calvinism so controversial in the church? The major reason we even know of John Calvin and Calvinism is because of his controversial views over predestination, election, free will, sovereignty, etc. If you cannot affirm his statements on at least those issues, then may I suggest you stop promoting the label Calvinist? Or, if nothing else, at least stop accusing people like myself of not really understanding Calvinism. In other words, if you're going to stand up...
I think you understand Calvinism pretty well, Leighton. I just think you leave some stuff out, like some of the historical stuff and dealing with some of the things the confessions say. Like you get some of it right for sure. I do think you lack some kind of historical backing when it comes to, or a historical foundation when it comes to some of the things you say, and you definitely don't deal with everything said within the confessions.
Against me for standing up against Calvinism because you think I've misrepresented Calvinism, then go read the leading scholars of Calvinist for yourself.
Yeah, I've read them. I go to pretty much a Calvinist Southern Baptist school, SBTS, Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. You know what it is. You got to sign the abstracted principles to be a professor there. You know what they believe. You know how many professors I've had over the last 8 years? I took a break for a long time, three or 4 years there. So but I've had a ton of professors. I'm only a few hours away from graduating with a 90-hour MDiv. So yeah, I've had several Calvinistic professors. Tom Schreiner for New Testament. I had him for another class. I forgot what it was, but anyway, yeah, I've had them all. Yeah, so I've read them. Been in all of their classes, wrote a lot of papers. I've read a lot of the original sources. I've had all my church histories. I've had to write papers on John Cassian with the semi-Pelagian controversy. Yeah, I've read widely. I'll admit that, but I have read the Calvinistic scholars as well. And yeah, a lot of the stuff you do get right, but a lot of it you like skip over, or you just don't deal with at all. Which makes it frustrating at times, right? Which I think I pointed out in this video quite a few times.
And show me explicitly how it is that I have misrepresented them.
I hope I've showed you that. I hope you see this.
By quoting them for themselves, by contending with their actual quotes, by playing their actual words. Then you can demonstrate to me.
Well, that I didn't do, I guess. So maybe you're gonna like not give me that, but I mean, like the history I brought out with Calvin defending Luther, him and Melanchthon, how he was specifically defending freedom and contingency in Luther's writings when that was kind of hard to find because Luther seemed to contradict himself in a few different places. But anyway, that just points to the fact that Calvin affirmed freedom and contingency, right? Whereas you're trying to say he doesn't. When you quote all those, the use all the quotes you have, and you don't consider the rest of his work, the body of his work. Yeah, and then you don't even come to the whole conversation understanding that Calvinism affirms freedom and contingency, right? You just throw that out and talk strictly about the decree in some kind of weird way of causation, as though it has, exerts force on the external world. I don't know. So
me how I've misrepresented them, and then I'll stop, because then I'll have something of substance actually to go off of, to know where I've missed the boat, so to speak. This is
freedom and contingency is where you've missed the boat when it comes to Calvinism, right? I'll say it again. If you want to just deal with some wacko internet hard determinists, then fine, right? Go do that. But the majority of Calvinists affirm freedom and contingency, right? We just don't affirm the freedom you do. Again, that's a discussion that can be had, but we affirm it nonetheless.
One of the pet peeves I have with those who continually bring accusations of misrepresentation. Leighton, you don't understand Calvinism. Leighton, you must have never been a Calvinist, because, my goodness, you just don't understand what Calvinism actually.
No, I think you were a Calvinist, but I just think you were a Calvinist like in the vein of the neo-Calvinists, or the young, restless, and reformed, if you will, right? The Matt Chandler type of Calvinists, right? Who hold to the tulip, and that's like it, right? They grab these few little points and then they run with it, rather than understanding what the points get at, rather than understanding that the confessions themselves affirm freedom and contingency. And at times, if you just hold to the tulip, and especially if that's like all you hold to, and you're just steadily on it, then you're going to deny freedom and contingency probably at some point, at least in the early stages of the old cage stage Calvinist. So yeah, I'm not saying you never were a Calvinist. I just don't know how much of a Calvinist you were, like how deep studied you were, how much of the history you understood, and how much of the tradition you understood. I don't know if you were confessional, if you just held to the tulip. Like I said, I think it's probably the case you were in the vein of a non-confessional type Calvinist that just thought that tulip was taught in the Bible, and you ran with it. Maybe I'm wrong there, but I think I'm probably right.
It teaches what it actually believes, what we actually say. And that yet I go and read from Jonathan Edwards and John Calvin and John Piper, play James White for himself in his own words. Over and over and over again, I let you hear what they actually say. Have Calvinists onto the program quite regularly, letting them represent themselves.
Which I do with you as well. I hope you acknowledge that, and your other viewers here that are watching this. I play Leighton for what he says, right? And have you one time in this video heard him mention that Calvinism affirms freedom and contingency, that it affirms secondary causation that is established within the decree of God, right? Have you heard him one time affirm that God is not the author of sin, according to the confessions that the majority of Calvinists would look to? Have you heard him say that one time? One time. How many times have you heard me say that in the video? More than I can count, right? I hope that point comes across.
Say almost in every broadcast something to the effect that Calvinists are not a monolithic group, explaining that there are different forms and heights of Calvinism, but explaining also logically, philosophically, and theologically why I disagree with the actual claims of the Calvinists that we're confronting on that.
And here's the thing about this too. I don't even care about Calvinism per se, right? I'm a Calvinist. I think it's true, right? I think it's biblical, but I don't care if you're a Calvinist. It don't matter to me if you're a Calvinist or not. You don't have to be a Calvinist to be a Christian, right? That's you don't have to be, right? I don't really care if you are or not. If you love Christ, then amen, brother, sister. Yeah, that's fine. You don't have to be a Calvinist. So I just want that to be understood. That I'm not coming at this in a way that would suggest that, like, oh, if you're not a Calvinist, then you know, X, Y, and Z. No, not true. Right? I don't think you have to be a Calvinist to be saved. I don't even care if you believe in Calvinism. But here's the thing: if you're going to engage with it, I think it needs to be done in a proper fashion. Right? And if you make a video like this where you talk a ton about the decree of God, which Leighton talked a ton about the decree of God throughout this entire video, and you never once mention freedom and contingency as a Calvinist would affirm it. You don't mention secondary causation. You don't mention the fact that the Westminster Confession of Faith and the Second London Baptist Confession of Faith both affirm that God is not the author of sin, that whatever the decree means, it does not make God the author of sin, nor does it take away freedom and secondary causation, or freedom and contingency of secondary causation, right? You don't mention any of that, while you mention the decree over and over and over as though God is this puppet master, right? You're not engaging with actual scholarly Calvinism at that point. Yeah, sure, you pulled some quotes from Calvin, but they're like they're cherry picked, right? You're not considering the rest of his work. You pulled some stuff from Piper, again, cherry picked. You don't consider the rest of his work. I don't know Piper's intimate details about what he believes, but I'm pretty sure that he's right in line with what I've said here today. He would affirm freedom and contingency in the same way that I have. Just the way the confessions do. Not that he's confessional, but I guarantee he's in that line. Jonathan Edwards in the same vein, right. One of the fathers of compatibilism, although you don't have to affirm Edwardsian compatibilism. There are other routes that you can take there, but yeah, he's still in that same vein. He affirms freedom and contingency, right?
Particular program. I certainly believe I've done far more to represent Calvinists as accurately as I possibly can, far more so than they have strived to represent provisionism, traditionalism, or even Arminianism. How many times have you heard Calvinists paint Arminians or non-Calvinists as believing things like what you just heard James White say? Oh, they just hate the decree of God, and they think God has to be our servant, and that free will is a superpower that thwarts the will of God. And all of these kinds of strange statements, like, Arminians believe that God gets into a DeLorean and travels into the future to foresee who's going to believe, and those are the ones he elects, and all of these caricatures painting Arminians and non-Calvinists in the most horrible light possible. At least I have Calvinists on the actual program to demonstrate what they actually believe. At least I'm reading from their actual points of contention.
I've played you a lot, Leighton, and I'll let you say. I mean, this video is almost done. It was longer than I thought. I thought it was 18 minutes. It's like 25 minutes. So, wow, I'm at like an hour 40 here, but I'm going to edit some of this out. It's a long one. I didn't mean to go this long. But anyway, I play you, and I'll let you speak, and I interact with what you say. I agree with you. I think that's the way it should be done. So anyway, we're gonna finish this out here.
At least I'm actually reading their documents for themselves. How many Calvinist broadcasts are you aware of where they're actually playing the view of their opponent or having them on their program to discuss it like I do on a regular basis? How many Calvinist programs, how many notable scholarly Calvinists do you know who have gone to the effort that I've gone to represent the opponent and the opposition? I would dare say there's not a notable Calvinist out there that has gone to the distance I have.
Well, I'm definitely not notable. That's true.
I've been willing to go to allow for the opponent to represent themselves on my actual program, with a standing invitation, by the way, to James White, to Jeff Durbin, and to other leading Calvinists to come onto the program and to discuss these things like brothers should discuss things, to have a conversation about our differences and actually contend with the points of contention versus painting strawmans and promoting canards, as James White just did in his latest broadcast. You be the judge as to whether or not we're willing to engage these subjects reasonably and honestly with one another.
All right, that's it. Yeah, appreciate that, Leighton. I hope you look at this though and see it. But just on concluding thoughts here. Yeah, Calvinists don't deny freedom and contingency. I know it kind of he paints it that way. Let me get rid of this screen share. Yeah, I know he paints it that way, but that like we just don't deny it at all. We do believe that God decrees whatsoever comes to pass, but we affirm man has a free will, that he is free, that he is contingent, that things fall out in a way that they could be or they could not be, right? According to our secondary causation, right? The God providentially brings about his decree through these means that cannot be like passed over if you want to engage with Calvinism. You just can't do it, right? You can't just say, well, I just want to talk about the decree. I mean, it's a robust, complex system, right? If you're going to engage with Calvinism, you're going to have to engage with that. I mean, again, if you want to just engage with wonky internet Calvinists that have some really strange views that could be put in the category of like hyper Calvinism or hard determinism, sure, I guess you can do that, but I don't think that's what you want to do. So anyway, thanks, Leighton. I appreciate you making videos and giving me the opportunity to respond to them, to hopefully to have some clarity in the discussion there. And it is a discussion. I'm not trying to berate you. I've said before, I appreciate everything that you do, and I do, and I understand that you're not just a one string banjo, if you will. I know you do a lot of other stuff. I disagree with you, soteriologically and philosophically. But that's okay. We're both grown. We can deal with that. Now, everyone else, if you stuck around this long, if you appreciate the content, please like and subscribe. Share the video. I'm really tiny. I need to grow a little bit. It would be nice. It takes a lot to put yourself out there on video like this. So I would appreciate a little bit of positive feedback there. Get out in the comments and ask questions. I'll try to answer them if I can. Appreciate everyone who makes comments, and that also helps with the YouTube algorithm for you to get down there in the comments. It helps out a lot. Other than that, I appreciate you sticking around this long. This has been a long one, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.